The Valkyrie Dominion had ruled the stars for 12,000 years. They were tall creatures, standing 7 feet high, with scales that shimmered like oil on water. Their empire stretched across 1,000 worlds, and they had conquered hundreds of species. No one had ever defeated them. No one had ever even come close. High Commander Zethvok sat on his command throne aboard the flagship Eternal Conquest. He was old, even by Valkyrie standards, and he had personally overseen the destruction of 17 civilizations. When his scouts reported finding a new species on a small blue planet orbiting an average yellow star, he felt nothing but boredom. Another primitive race to add to the collection. Another easy victory. The humans, as they called themselves, had only recently discovered space travel. Their ships were slow and clumsy. Their weapons were laughably simple. They used chemical rockets and projectile weapons, technologies the Valkyrie had abandoned thousands of years ago. "Send 1 battlecruiser," Zethvok ordered. "Give them the standard ultimatum. They have 72 hours to surrender completely, or we will burn their cities to ash." Captain Danny Reyes was having a quiet day aboard the research vessel Curiosity. His ship was conducting surveys near Neptune, collecting data on ice formations and radiation patterns. It was boring work, but Danny liked boring. He was 41 years old, had a wife and 2 kids back on Earth, and he planned to retire in 3 years with a nice pension. His plans changed when the Valkyrie battlecruiser dropped out of hyperspace. The alien ship was enormous. Nearly 3 kilometers long, it dwarfed everything humanity had ever built. Its hull was covered in strange symbols, and weapons ports lined every surface. Danny stared at it through the viewport, his coffee cup frozen halfway to his lips. "Captain," said Lisa Gomez, his communications officer. Her voice was shaking. "They're hailing us." The message played across their screens. The aliens spoke in a deep, rumbling voice that somehow translated itself into English. It told them that Earth now belonged to the Valkyrie Dominion. All humans would become slaves. Any resistance would be punished with death. They had 72 hours to accept their fate. Danny set down his coffee cup very carefully. He looked around at his crew. 47 people, most of them scientists who had never fired a weapon in their lives. They were all looking at him, waiting for him to say something. "Open a channel to Earth Command," Danny said. "Priority 1. Tell them we have a situation." On Earth, Admiral Catherine Price was sleeping when the call came in. She was 63 years old and had been in the military for 40 years. She had fought in 3 wars and had never lost a battle. Her enemies called her the Iron Lady because nothing seemed to scare her. She listened to Danny's report without interrupting. When it was finished, she sat in silence for a long moment. Then she picked up her phone. "Wake up the president," she said, "and get me the Joint Chiefs. We have work to do." The next 48 hours were the busiest in human history. The Valkyrie ultimatum was broadcast to every nation on Earth. For a few hours, there was panic. People ran through the streets. Some tried to hide. Some prayed. Some simply sat and waited for the end. But then something remarkable happened. Old enemies stopped fighting each other. Countries that had been at war for decades suddenly declared peace. Russia, China, America, Europe, Africa, Asia, every nation on Earth joined together under a single command structure. Factories that had been building cars started building weapons. Scientists who had been working on separate projects began sharing their research. Admiral Price watched the reports coming in from around the world. She had expected chaos and despair. Instead, she saw something she had never seen before: the entire human race working together as one. "They made a mistake," she said quietly to her aide. "They thought fear would break us. But they don't understand what we are." Meanwhile, the Valkyrie grew impatient. High Commander Zethvok had expected the humans to surrender immediately. Every other species had. The Valkyrie would show up with their big ships and their scary weapons, and the primitives would fall to their knees and beg for mercy. But the humans weren't begging. They weren't surrendering. They were building things, moving things, preparing. What are they doing? Zethvok demanded, watching the sensor readings from his flagship. They appeared to be mobilizing their military forces, his second-in-command reported. All of them. Zethvok laughed. Their military? With their primitive weapons and slow ships? What do they think they can accomplish? He didn't wait for an answer. He ordered a landing party to be sent to Earth's moon, where the humans had a small outpost. It would be a demonstration of Valkyrie power. A reminder of what happened to those who resisted. Corporal Eddie Vance was 24 years old. He had joined the Space Force because he thought it would be an adventure. He never expected to actually fight anyone. The moon base was supposed to be safe, quiet, boring. Now he stood in the eastern corridor with his sergeant, Maria Santos, watching 15 Valkyrie soldiers march toward the airlock. They were huge, covered in those strange shimmering scales, carrying weapons that glowed with energy. They moved like they owned the place, like the humans inside were already dead. Eddie looked at his rifle. It was a simple kinetic weapon, basically the same design humans had been using for 300 years. It fired metal projectiles at high speed. The Valkyrie had probably scanned it and dismissed it as useless. The airlock opened. The Valkyrie stepped through. Fire, Sergeant Santa said quietly. What happened next would be studied in military academies for centuries. The Valkyrie had shields that could stop energy weapons. They had armor that could resist heat and radiation. But they had never encountered a species that used simple metal bullets moving at supersonic speeds. The first Valkyrie soldier fell with 3 holes in his chest. The second took a bullet through his eye. The third tried to raise his weapon, but was cut down before he could fire. The humans moved through the corridors like ghosts, using cover and angles that the Valkyrie had never considered. 11 minutes later, 12 Valkyrie soldiers were dead. 3 had fled back to their shuttle in complete panic. Eddie had taken a plasma burn to his left arm that would scar him for life. He barely noticed. "They can die," he said, looking at the alien bodies on the floor. "They actually die just like anything else." News of the victory spread across Earth within hours. The fear began to fade. In its place grew something else. The Valkyrie had never encountered before. Hope. Admiral Price smiled when she heard the report. "Send a message to every military base on the planet," she said. "Tell them what happened on the moon. Tell them the aliens are not invincible." She paused, her eyes hard. "And tell them to get ready, because this war has just begun." High Commander Zethvok stared at the report in disbelief. 12 of his soldiers were dead, killed by primitives using metal projectiles. It was impossible. It was humiliating. It was unacceptable. For the first time in centuries, Zethvok felt something cold crawling up his spine. He had conquered dozens of species. He had watched civilizations burn. But he had never lost soldiers to a species that hadn't even discovered hyperspace travel yet. "Send a full invasion force," he commanded. 50 warships. 200,000 soldiers. I want that planet turned to dust. The Valkyrie fleet gathered in the outer reaches of the solar system. It was a terrifying sight. 50 massive warships, each one capable of destroying a city in seconds. They moved toward Earth in perfect formation, their weapons charged and ready. On Earth, people watched the alien fleet approach on their screens. Some cried. Some prayed. But most of them simply went back to work. There was too much to do. Dr. Nina Patterson was working in a military bunker deep beneath the Rocky Mountains. She was a xenobiologist, a scientist who studied alien life. Before this week, her work had been purely theoretical. Now she had actual alien bodies to examine. "Come look at this," she called to General Howard Blake, who was overseeing the research team. Howard walked over and looked at the display showing the internal structure of a Velthari soldier. He was a practical man who had grown up hunting deer in Montana. He didn't understand most of the scientific terms Nina used, but he understood threats. "What am I looking at?" he asked. Nina pointed to a cluster of organs near the alien's spine. "Their nervous system is extremely centralized, and their pain receptors are very sensitive." She pulled up another image. Their evolutionary history was easy. They became the top predators on their world without ever facing serious competition. They never developed resistance to pain or injury. Howard nodded slowly. "So they're not used to getting hurt." "More than that," Nina said. "They're not used to fighting anyone who fights back. Every species they've conquered surrendered immediately. They've never had to deal with real resistance." Howard smiled grimly. "Well, they're about to learn." The Velthari invasion began 3 days later. Troop carriers descended through Earth's atmosphere over the Pacific Ocean. They came down like a metal rain, thousands of them, blocking out the sun. They were met by every aircraft humanity could put in the sky. Lieutenant Commander Rosa Delgado was 32 years old. She had been flying fighter jets since she was 19. Her call sign was Tiger, and she led a squadron of 12 pilots known as the Hellcats. "All right, Hellcats," she said over the radio as the alien ships came into view. "These things are big and scary, but they die just like anything else. Stay fast, stay low, and hit them where it hurts." The Battle of the Pacific lasted 3 days. It was the largest air battle in human history. The sky burned with explosions as human pilots threw themselves at the Velthari. Fleet. Rosa flew 37 missions during those 3 days. She slept in her cockpit between flights, eating energy bars and drinking coffee. Her hands shook from exhaustion, but she kept flying. The Velthari had better technology. Their weapons were more powerful. Their ships were faster. But they had never fought an enemy like this. Human pilots flew suicide runs into their carrier bays. Damaged planes rammed into alien engines instead of retreating. Even when they were outnumbered and outgunned, the humans kept coming. On the second day, Rose's wingman, a young pilot named Kevin Ortiz, took a hit that disabled his weapon systems. Instead of ejecting, he flew his plane directly into a Velthari troop carrier. The explosion killed him instantly, but it also destroyed a ship carrying 2,000 alien soldiers. Rosa saw it happen. She didn't cry. There wasn't time. She just turned her plane toward the next target and kept fighting. By the end of the 3rd day, the Velthari had lost over a third of their invasion force. Hundreds of their ships floated in pieces across the Pacific. Thousands of their soldiers had died before even reaching the ground. Rosa's plane finally gave out over the Philippine Sea. The engine was shot. The wings were damaged, and warning lights were flashing across her display. She ejected at the last moment and splashed down into the warm water. An hour later, a fishing boat found her. It was crewed by an elderly couple who had refused to evacuate despite the government's orders. "You fight good," the old man told her, helping her onto the deck. "We saw the ships burning in the sky, like fireworks." Rosa accepted the cup of tea his wife offered her. She looked up at the sky, where smoke trails were still visible. The Velthari troop carriers were retreating, pulling back toward their main fleet. "We're just getting started," she said quietly. The news of the Pacific victory spread across the world. People celebrated in the streets. But Admiral Price knew this was just the beginning. The Velthari had underestimated humanity. They wouldn't make that mistake again. "They'll come back with more ships," she told her commanders during a briefing. "More soldiers, more weapons. We hurt them, but we didn't break them. What do we do?" One of the generals asked. Admiral Price looked at the map of the solar system on the wall. Beyond it lay the stars, where the Velthari Empire stretched across 1,000 worlds. "We don't wait for them to attack again," she said. "We take the fight to them." The room fell silent. Taking the war to the Velthari meant building ships that could travel between stars. It meant invading alien worlds. It meant fighting an empire that had ruled the galaxy for 12,000 years, but nobody argued. Nobody said it was impossible, because they were human. And humans didn't know how to give up thought in the Velthari fleet. High Commander Zethvok received reports of the defeat with growing horror. This was not supposed to happen. These were primitives. These were insects. How could they possibly be winning? For the first time in his long life, Zethvok began to wonder if he had made a terrible mistake. He had no idea how right he was. 6 months passed after the Battle of the Pacific. The Velthari fleet still circled beyond Mars, waiting for reinforcements. They had learned to be careful around the humans. They had learned that these strange creatures from the blue planet did not fight like anyone else in the galaxy. On Earth, something incredible was happening. Scientists worked around the clock, studying the captured Velthari technology. Engineers tore apart alien engines and weapons, learning their secrets. Factories ran day and night, building new ships, new weapons, new tools for the war to come. Dr. Calvin Moore was a propulsion engineer from Houston. He was 53 years old, wore thick glasses, and had spent his entire career studying rocket engines. When they gave him a Velthari hyperdrive to examine, he didn't sleep for a week. "I figured it out," he announced to the research team on the 8th day. His eyes were red from lack of sleep, and his hands were stained with alien grease. "The hyperdrive?" General Blake asked in disbelief. "You cracked it already?" Calvin shrugged. "Their math is good, but their engineering is lazy. They've been using the same designs for thousands of years. No improvements, no innovations. They got comfortable." He held up a small device covered in strange symbols. "I can build us a better one in 6 months." He was wrong. He built it in 4. The first human starship was named Defiance. It was not beautiful like the Velthari ships. It was ugly and angular, covered in welded plates and exposed pipes. But it worked. It could travel between stars. And it was armed with weapons that mixed human and alien, technology in ways the Velthari had never imagined. Captain Patricia Cole stood on the bridge of the Defiance as it prepared for launch. She was 51 years old and had spent 20 years commanding submarines in the Navy. She was known for 2 things: her brilliant tactical mind and her complete refusal to accept defeat. "All hands. This is the captain," she announced over the ship's speakers. "Our mission is simple. We're going to find the Velthari homeworld, and we're going to show them what happens when you threaten our planet." The crew of 200 cheered. Most of them were young soldiers, engineers, scientists who had volunteered for a mission they might not return from. They were scared, but they were also angry. The Velthari had tried to enslave their world. Now it was time for payback. The Defiance launched from lunar orbit on a cold December morning. Captain Cole watched Earth shrink in the viewport, a small blue marble against the darkness of space. She wondered if she would ever see it again. The journey to the Velthari home system took 4 months. The crew trained constantly, running combat drills and studying enemy tactics. Commander Tony Marsh, who led the Marine unit aboard the ship, pushed his soldiers hard. "We're going to be the first humans to set foot on alien world," he told them during a briefing. "The first humans to fight on enemy soil. I don't know what we'll find there. But I know this: we didn't come all this way to lose." When the Defiance finally dropped out of hyperspace in the Velthari home system, the crew expected to find a fortress. A massive defensive fleet. Armies waiting to destroy them. Instead, they found a civilization that had grown soft. The Velthari homeworld was called Velthara Prime. It was a beautiful planet, covered in silver cities and purple forests. But its defenses were weak. The fleet protecting it was small and poorly maintained. The soldiers on the surface had never trained for a serious attack. Why would they? No enemy had ever reached this far. No species had ever dared to threaten the heart of the Dominion dot until now. "They don't know we're here," Patricia said quietly, studying the sensor data. "Their detection systems are old. They're not even looking for threats." Commander Marsh grinned. "Then let's introduce ourselves." The Defiance moved into position over a major communications hub on the planet's surface. It was a massive tower that connected Velthera Prime to every world in the Dominion. If they controlled it, they could broadcast to the entire Empire. The Marine landing party consisted of 30 soldiers. They descended to the planet in small drop pods, falling through the atmosphere like meteors. The Veltheri detected them at the last moment, but it was too late. Tony was the first human to set foot on alien soil. The gravity was lighter than Earth's, and the air smelled like copper. He raised his rifle and scanned the area. Veltheri soldiers were running toward them, but they were confused and disorganized. "Move," Tony ordered. "Take the tower." The battle lasted 47 minutes. The Veltheri fought back, but they were no match for the humans. They were too slow, too scared, too unused to enemies who didn't run away. When the last defender fell, Tony walked into the control room and activated the communication system. His face appeared on screens across 1,000 worlds. Veltheri generals saw him. Conquered species saw him. Everyone in the Dominion saw the strange creature from the primitive planet, standing in the heart of their empire. "This is humanity," Tony said, his voice calm and steady. "You attacked our home. You threatened our families. You thought we were weak, primitive, easy prey." He paused, letting the words sink in. "You were wrong. Surrender now, or we will teach you what war really means." He cut the transmission. For a long moment, there was silence across the galaxy. Then, on a dozen worlds, conquered species began to stir. The Kreth, aquatic beings who had been slaves for 6,000 years, looked at each other with new hope. The Selari, moth-like creatures known for their patience, began to whisper among themselves. Even the Fenric, dog-like beings who had served the Veltheri faithfully, started to question their masters. If these humans could strike at the heart of the Dominion, maybe the Veltheri weren't invincible after all. Maybe it was time to fight back on the Defiance. Captain Cole watched the reports coming in from across the Empire. Riots were breaking out on a dozen worlds. Veltheri governors were fleeing their posts. The entire Dominion was beginning to crack. "We didn't just attack them," she said quietly. "We gave everyone else hope." Tony's voice came over the cum from the surface. "Captain, what are your orders?" Patricia smiled. It was a cold, hard smile. "Hold that tower, Commander. We're not done yet." The message from the human soldier spread across the galaxy like fire through dry grass. On every world controlled by the Veltheri, beings who had been slaves for centuries watched the recording over and over. They saw Tony standing in the heart of the Dominion, speaking words that no conquered species had ever dared to speak, and they began to believe. The first rebellion started on a water world called Krethos. The Kreth were an aquatic species with silver scales and large, dark eyes. They had been enslaved by the Veltheri 6,000 years ago, forced to harvest minerals from the ocean floor for their masters. A young Kreth named Shallowtide watched the human broadcast in his tiny underwater dwelling. He had never seen anything like it. A species fighting back. A species winning. He swam to his elder's chamber that night. "We could do the same," he said. "We could fight." The elder looked at him with ancient, tired eyes. "We tried once long ago. Thousands of our people died. But the humans proved it's possible," Shallowtide insisted. The Velthari are afraid. I can feel it. If we strike now, while they're distracted. The rebellion of Krithos began 3 days later. The Kreth rose from the depths of their oceans and overwhelmed the Velthari garrison before they could call for help. It was messy and bloody, but when it was over, Krithos was free for the first time in 6,000 years. Similar stories played out across the Dominion, on a forest world called Solara. The moth-like beings known as the Solari had been waiting for centuries. They were patient creatures who measured time in generations. Their elders had told them that one day an opportunity would come. When they saw the human broadcast, they knew the time had arrived. The Solari didn't fight with weapons. They fought with knowledge. For thousands of years, they had been maintaining the Dominion's computer systems, quietly learning every secret, every weakness. In a single night, they shut down Velthari communications across an entire sector. Even the Fenric, the dog-like species who had served as loyal soldiers for the Velthari, began to turn. A Fenric commander named Grey Fang watched his masters flee from the advancing human fleet and felt something change inside him. "We have served them for generations," he told his troops. "We have died for them. And now they run like cowards while we are left to fight their battles." He lowered his weapon. No more. On the Velthari homeworld, High Commander Zethvok watched his empire crumble. Reports came in every hour of another world lost, another fleet destroyed, another rebellion crushing his governors. In just 6 months, the Dominion had gone from ruling 1,000 worlds to controlling barely 100, and the humans kept coming. The Defiance had been joined by 12 more human ships. They called themselves the Liberation Fleet, and they moved through Velthari space like a storm. Every world they visited, they freed. Every garrison they encountered, they destroyed. Captain Patricia Cole coordinated the fleet from the bridge of the Defiance. She had not slept more than 4 hours a night since the campaign began. Her hair had gone gray at the temples, and lines had appeared on her face that hadn't been there before. But her eyes were still sharp, still fierce. "Admiral Price is sending reinforcements," her communications officer reported. 20 more ships? They'll be here in 3 weeks. Patricia nodded. Back on Earth, humanity had gone into full production mode. Shipyards ran around the clock. Every month, more ships launched. More soldiers deployed. More weapons were built. The Velthari couldn't match this pace. They had been stagnant for too long. Their factories were old and slow. Their population had grown comfortable with conquest and had forgotten how to sacrifice. Meanwhile, humans worked 18-hour days without complaint. They gave up luxuries, skipped meals, pushed themselves to exhaustion, because they understood what was at stake. Commander Tony Marsh had been promoted twice since the invasion of Velthar Prime. He now commanded the ground forces for the entire Liberation Fleet. His soldiers were a mix of humans and aliens, Kreth warriors, Solari technicians, and even some Fenric who had switched sides. "Strange times," he said to Captain Cole during a video call from the surface of a recently freed world. "I've got aliens serving under my command now. Good fighters, too." Patricia smiled tiredly. "The enemy of my enemy, Commander." "It's more than that," Tony said. "They respect us. They say they've never seen anything like humans before. We don't give up. We don't surrender. We just keep coming no matter what." He paused. "I think we scared them a little, even the ones on our side." High Commander Zethvok made one last desperate attempt to save his empire. He gathered every remaining ship, every surviving soldier, and launched a massive counterattack against the human fleet. The Battle of the Void, as it would later be called, lasted for 3 days. It was fought in the empty space between stars, where there was nothing but darkness and death. The Velthari threw everything they had at the humans. It wasn't enough. Rosa Delgado, now promoted to commander, led a squadron of fighters against the Valkyrie flagship. She was 34 years old, with scars from a dozen battles and eyes that had seen too much death. But she still flew like she had nothing to lose. "There's the big one," she told her squadron, pointing at Zethvok's command ship. "Take out the engines. We ground that ship, and this war is over." The attack run cost her 6 pilots. 6 friends who burned up in the void, their ships torn apart by enemy fire. But they did it. They crippled the flagship's engines and left it drifting helplessly in space. When the battle ended, the Valkyrie fleet was destroyed. I Commander Zethvok surrendered himself to Captain Cole personally. He walked onto the bridge of the Defiance in chains, his scales dull with defeat. "How?" he asked, his voice hollow. "You were nothing. Primitives. How did you defeat us?" Patricia looked at the alien who had threatened to destroy her world. She felt no satisfaction, no triumph. Just exhaustion and a grim sense of duty. "You thought being powerful made you strong," she said quietly. "But real strength isn't about weapons or technology. It's about refusing to give up. It's about fighting even when you can't win." She turned away from him. "You forgot how to do that a long time ago." "We never did." The Valkyrie Dominion officially surrendered 2 weeks later. 12,000 years of empire ended not with a final glorious battle, but with a quiet signing ceremony on a neutral space station, and humanity, the primitive species from the small blue planet, became the most respected and feared force in the galaxy. 2 years had passed since the first Valkyrie ship appeared near Neptune. 2 years of blood, sacrifice, and fire. 2 years that had changed everything. The Galactic Council met for the first time on a space station, built specifically for this purpose. It floated in neutral space, far from any single world or empire. Representatives from 50 species had gathered here, some former slaves of the Valkyrie, some who had watched from afar, and some who had fought alongside humanity in the final battles. Ambassador Deborah Price represented Earth. She was 55 years old, with sharp gray eyes and a calm voice that commanded attention. Before the war, she had been a diplomat specializing in trade negotiations. Now she spoke for all of humanity. The council chamber was circular, with seats arranged in tiers around a central speaking platform. Strange beings filled those seats, creatures with scales, feathers, tentacles, and forms that human minds struggled to comprehend. All of them watched as Deborah walked to the center of the room. "Thank you all for coming," she began. "I know many of you traveled far to be here. I know some of you still fear us. I want to address that fear directly." She paused, looking around the chamber at the alien faces watching her. "We didn't ask for this war. 2 years ago, we were happy on our world, exploring our own solar system, learning about the universe. We knew nothing about the Valkyrie or their dominion. We knew nothing about any of you." She took a breath. "Then they came. They told us to surrender or die. They gave us 72 hours to accept slavery." The chamber was silent. Many of the beings present had received similar ultimatums once, long ago. "We refused," Deborah continued, "not because we thought we could win. We knew how powerful they were. We knew how primitive our technology was compared to theirs. We refused because we couldn't do anything else. Because surrendering to tyranny is something humans simply don't know how to do." She walked slowly around the platform, meeting the eyes of various delegates. "We are not a violent species by nature. We write poetry. We create art. We build things and dream of better futures. We love our children and mourn our dead." Her voice hardened slightly. "But we also have a very long memory. And when someone threatens our home, our families, our freedom, we become something else entirely." A murmur passed through the chamber. The assembled beings had seen what humans became. They had watched the Liberation Fleet tear through Valkyrie space. They had seen human soldiers charge into impossible odds and somehow win. "I know you're afraid of us," Deborah said. "I understand why. In 2 years, we went from a species that had barely reached its own moon to a force that conquered an empire 12,000 years old. You're wondering if we'll come for you next." She let the words hang in the air. "We won't," she said finally. "We're not conquerors. We're not empire builders. All we ever wanted was to be left alone, to explore and learn and grow at our own pace." She smiled just slightly. "But we learned something important in this war. We learned that we're not alone in this galaxy. We learned that there are others out there who deserve freedom just as much as we do." She turned to face the section where the former slave species sat, the Kreth, the Solari, the Fenric, and dozens of others. "You fought alongside us. You bled with us. You helped us win this war. We will never forget that." She bowed her head slightly. "And we will never abandon you." The Kreth delegate, shallow-tide now, a hero on his world, rose from his seat. His silver scales gleamed in the chamber's lights. "The humans could have stopped after defeating the Valkyrie," he said, his voice carrying across the chamber. "They could have taken what they wanted and gone home. Instead, they freed us. World after world, they fought to break our chains." He looked at Deborah with something like reverence. "I have lived my entire life as a slave. My parents were slaves. My grandparents were slaves. For 6,000 years, my people knew nothing but bondage." His voice cracked with emotion. "The humans gave us our freedom. They gave us ourselves. That is a debt we can never repay." Similar statements came from other delegates. The Solari spoke of how humans had helped them rebuild their shattered culture. The Fenric talked about finding honor and purpose fighting alongside human soldiers. Species that had once served the Valkyrie now praised their former enemies' kindness. When the speeches were finished, Deborah returned to the platform. "We propose an alliance," she said. "Not an empire. Not a dominion. A partnership of equals. Trade, cooperation, mutual defense. Each species governs itself, makes its own choices, follows its own path." She looked around the chamber. "But we stand together against any who would threaten that freedom, any who would try to enslave or conquer." The vote was unanimous. The Galactic Alliance was borne out in the observation deck above the chamber. Captain Danny Reyes watched the proceedings with Admiral Price. It seemed like a lifetime ago that he had been a simple research captain conducting surveys near Neptune. Now he commanded a fleet of 12 warships and was considered one of the heroes of the Liberation War. "Think they got the message?" he asked. Admiral Price watched as the delegates began signing the Alliance Charter. She was 65 now, her hair completely white, her face lined with age and exhaustion. But her eyes were still fierce, still sharp. "I think they understand," she said. "The galaxy has always had predators, species that conquered and enslaved. The Valkyrie thought they were the ultimate predators, the top of the food chain." She turned to Danny with a small smile. "They never imagined something like us. A species that doesn't give up, that adapts and overcomes, that just keeps getting back up no matter how many times you knock it down." Danny nodded, thinking of all the friends he had lost. Eddie Vance, now a colonel, who had been the first to prove the Valkyrie could die. Rosa Delgado, who had flown impossible missions and lived to tell about them. Commander Tony Marsh, who had planted the first human boot on alien soil. Millions had died in the war. Soldiers, civilians, families who had never asked for any of this. Their sacrifice weighed on him every day. "We're not the scariest species because we're the strongest," he said quietly. "We're the scariest because we absolutely refuse to lose." Admiral Price put a hand on his shoulder. "And that's why the galaxy needs us. Not to conquer, not to rule, but to remind everyone that freedom is worth fighting for." that tyrants can be defeated. That hope is never foolish. Below them, the delegates were shaking hands and tentacles and other appendages, forming connections that would last for generations. Humans moved among them, smiling and talking, building bridges that had seemed impossible 2 years ago. "Welcome to the galaxy, Captain," Admiral Price said. "I think they're finally ready to meet their new neighbors." Danny looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, on a small blue planet orbiting an average yellow star, 7 billion humans were going about their lives. Most of them would never travel to space. Most of them would never meet an alien. But they could look up at the night sky and know that their species had earned its place among the stars, not through conquest, not through fear, but through sheer, stubborn refusal to be anything less than free. The Velthari had made a mistake when they gave humanity that ultimatum. They had expected surrender. They had expected weakness. Instead, they had awakened something ancient and terrible, a species forged by ice ages and plagues, by wars and disasters, by challenges that would have broken any other civilization. Humanity had faced extinction 1,000 times and survived every single one. The galaxy was about to learn why.